So hello and welcome to the monoprinting demo inspired by the artist Prunella Cloth. I'm going to show you methods and techniques for doing monoprinting, and then we'll do a little bit of what's called chine collé, where we use a bit of tissue paper and glue to create textural effects after that, and then painting on top of the monoprint using watercolor and mixing neutral colors. So quite a lot. So I'll just go into the demo. So I've got 3 rollers because I'm going to be doing 3 different colors, and I'm using this oil-based printing ink, but it's washable with water. And I've got 3 colors. I'm going to use red, blue, and this dark violet, which comes up quite like a bit like black. I've got a piece of glass. This is actually an old fridge shelf, and then I've got a thin paper, so you can get specialist smooth printing paper. The most important thing when you're doing monoprinting really is that the paper needs to be smooth and it needs to be quite thin, so not a very high GSM. So something like 300 GSM, it won't work very well. I think this is about 120 maybe, or even 90. It's actually printing paper for a photocopier, but obviously you can use any kind of paper as long as it's a smooth texture. It works better that way. So I'm actually going to just make this paper smaller in my first one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test run just to show you the technique. And then I've got this nice jug, which my mum might recognise, and a lemon and a lime, and a cup of tea, which you can't see, which I'm probably going to use as inspiration to do a little still life after a minute, once I've just demonstrated this technique. So I'm going to start with the violet colour. Now, this is the most important thing. Before you begin, always take a deep breath, relax, don't worry about this weird process that sometimes goes wrong. Just try and enjoy it, and unscrew your lid and put a very, 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 very small amount, tiny amount of ink onto your, this is crucial, it has to be, see, that might even be too much. You can see the size of it in relation to my fingernail. It's very small, and then it's actually probably a bit too much. I'm going to actually make that, I'm going to halve it. I'm going to take up a little bit of it. I'm just going to pause so I can find my palette knife, because I think I might have too much there, so I'm just going to halve that amount. I've just taken half of the ink off, and I'm just going to put it somewhere where it's not going to go everywhere. I'm going to pop it over there. I'm just going to focus my camera a bit better. That's slightly better. Right. And then you just roll it. This can take quite a long time. So you just roll out the ink until you've got a kind of significant amount of ink. And you can see how see-through that starts to become, quite see-through on the glass. So this is crucial, that it's not too thick. So it's so thin that you can kind of see through it. It's translucent. You can see the messy piece of paper underneath with the blobs of paint on it. Now, it might be that there isn't actually enough on here, but we'll see what happens. So the other important thing is to get it as smooth as you can. The lines of the roller will sort of show as you're rolling it, so you want to try and get a sort of smooth, keep rolling it so it's nice and smooth and there aren't those kind of lines. Always place your roller this way up, facing upwards. It's got a special handy thing there, so it doesn't doesn't roll around and it doesn't get ink on everything. Okay, and then take your piece of paper and you just, now this is important, you don't want to put any pressure on when you drop the piece of paper on top of your ink. So you just sort of let it drop, okay? And you can, if you want, tape it down at this point so it doesn't move around using masking tape or something, but I tend not to. And then you just get an ordinary pencil. Well, this is a 9H, so it'll be quite hard pencil. And that's quite good because, well, I'll show you. So I'm going to just do some doodling and not draw anything at this point, just to show you this process. And I'm actually going to write something, and when you write, you need to write backwards. That's an important thing to know. So hello, and some scribbling, and some lines, and more lines. I think that might have gone out of the range of the ink, but there we are, and maybe some zigzags. Oh, you can't really see it on the it's I'll do it in a darker pencil next time, but anyway. And then when you lift it up, you can see, because I've used a very hard pencil, it's a 9H, that is really, really sharp. The line is super sharp, and because I've used so little ink, it's quite light colour as well. Okay, so that's one method, and I'm going to show you then what happens when you put a bit more ink onto your glass. So I'm picking up that ink that I put aside earlier, and I'm just going to splodge it in the middle of, it's the same colour, so that's okay. And then same roller because it's the same colour, and then just rolling, and this can take quite a long time, so I'm going to pause the video. I'm just going to continue to roll until it's all smooth on the glass. So pressure is quite important when you're rolling. You want to kind of press quite hard so that you really are kind of making the ink distribute across the surface of the glass. And you can see, hopefully, how that is quite a lot thicker. Not too thick, you can still see through it, but it's thicker than the one I did previously. So I'm going to take my piece of paper, take a deep breath, drop the piece of paper onto the ink, and this time I'm going to use a softer pencil, so I'm going to use a 6B, and also this time I'm going to look at the objects I've got in front of me, so just for inspiration, and as well note that when you touch the edges it will pick up ink. You'll get this sort of, as you'll see when I show you when I've done it, you'll get this nice soft effect. So if you put your finger down, you know, and you don't want just a blob there, you want to kind of make sure you kind of evenly distribute the pressure and make, you know, so that it's not just kind of these weird blobs. It sort of becomes like this smokiness, but you'll see what happens when I show it to you afterwards. And then, so I'm just going to literally just draw this jug freehand and quite, you know, exactitude is not truth, as Matisse said. I'm not going for accuracy, I'm just going for a kind of wibbly wobbly jug effect. I might put some hatching in there to give it a bit of shadow, scribbliness, get more shadow, depth, and then I do some little circles because there's circles on here, and it's got this nice scribbly texture, this jug. So I think it was my granny's. Mum, was it granny's jug? You're on mute, so you can't. It was granny's jug. Anyway, so squiggles, And then I'm going to draw in, being aware that my ink does go all the way down. So I'm going to draw in the edge of this plate. It's a bit wibbly wobbly. And then draw lemon. And then the bit of lime that's got the segment out of it. And then you can do things like, if you put less pressure on, you'll get lighter, you know, it's just like with drawing really. It'll pick up less ink if you, I'm just drawing in a little bit of texture of this lemon, but I'm doing it a bit lighter with a lighter touch so that if you press harder, you'll get darker, you know, pick up more ink. And then there's a couple of splodges on this. And some little dots. And then I might lightly just draw a little bit of the pattern. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because I bet you can't wait to see what happens. And then I'm just going to do some smoothie bits with my fingers around the edges, and that will pick up a bit of ink, smooth, make a kind of sort of blendy effect. So, are you ready? Ta-da, ta-da. So that is what it looks like on the other side of the page. So it's a bit like magic. So you see how where I've pressed my fingers gently around, it's picked up kind of bits of the ink in this kind of smudgy way. That's because, you know, the softness of your fingers, it's creating that texture. And then where I've drawn, you know, quite with a pencil, I mean, obviously it's a 6B, it's quite soft, but where I've pressed really hard, it's picked it up darker. Where I've pressed more lightly, it's showing up less dark and less intense. But it is just a really lovely kind of effect that you can achieve with monoprint. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video while I turn my glass around, and I'm going to show you how to, you can do layering with this technique. So I'm going to put some blue and red onto this piece. So I'm going to do another layer of monoprint in one sec. So basically, to add another colour onto this monoprint, I'm going to obviously just do the same thing. So I'm going to put tiny smidgen, splidge or splodge of red onto my glass, and then roll it with a different roller, so I don't have to clean. If you have only one roller, it's very important to clean the roller between colours. But I'm lucky enough to have several rollers, so so I'll pause because it's the same process. I'm just going to roll it out till it's quite thin. And then I think I might show you the technique that Dick just talked about, where you don't roll it out to cover the whole page, you just roll out a little area, and then you can move your paper around in that area. I'm going to add a little bit more ink because that's a bit too thin. So I'll pause while I do that. So I've rolled out a little patch of red. I'm going to put my red roller aside. And then, so Dick mentioned a targeted approach where you don't put the whole page onto your ink. You can just put an area. So move that over there. So I'm just going to put the jug area, the jug, onto this red. And that actually then means that I can put pressure down here, and I know there's no ink down here, so I'm not going to get fingerprints down there. And I'm using again a softer pencil. And so it's great because unlike with lino cut, you have to be really careful about lining everything up. With monoprint, you've got your drawing there, so you know where the print is on the other side. So if I'm just going to colour in these red dots. I know that they'll go red, obviously, because I've got red ink down. So and then I think that's ink. So a couple of red spots up here. Okay, and then lifting it up. Oops. So you can see the way it works is where I've pressed really hard, it's picked up quite a lot of red. And then in the other areas, I didn't put any pressure on, but it has picked up a little bit of red. And then, you know, it does create this nice dreamy kind of effect. And then, so I'm going to roll it again, because now I've got spots on my ink, I want to roll it back out so that they don't kind of show up on the, I mean, you can have it so that you pick up less ink in that area and kind of make a thing of it, but I'm not going to do that at this point. So just moving this down a little bit, placing it here over where the plate is, and then I'm just going to put like a little bit of red around the line of the edge. I'm kind of making it up now. This isn't actually accurate to the plate. It's not red, it's blue. But I just want to balance the colours, so, and just a little bit of smudgy with my finger. You can also use a blending stick, which is like this, to create a sort of blended, less intense effect, less harsh line, a softer line. So lifting this up, and you can see, so where I've drawn the line with pencil, it's quite a sharp line, and then where I've used the blending stick or my finger, it's softer. So it's created quite a nice effect there. And now I'm going to add some blue to it. So I'm going to pause the recording, because basically all I'm going to do is the same that I did with these, roll out a little bit of ink. I'm going to do it in a little square here, do the targeted approach, and then print it up. So I'll pause while I roll out my ink. Okay, so I've ended up going quite big actually, so I'm going to just place the whole thing gently onto the blue. And then this time I'm going to use the mechanical pencil, which has got a finer tip. So, because I want to make these scribbly bits similar to how they are on the jug, so they're quite thinly described. So just going to put a bit of blue around the jug there, and then is that touching up there? Yes, it is. So there's a little bit around here, and then I'm going to draw on the plate. There are like little leaves and things in the pattern of the plate, so I'm going to draw those, just a few of those, not copying precisely, but just kind of adding some of the little leafy shapes in detail in this mechanical pencil into the plate area. I think they're actually violets, I think. You don't really look till you start drawing necessarily at all the precise details of shapes and patterns on things. So, and then I'm just going to do some little squiggly bits, because there are these quite nice little sort of shapes around the edge of this plate. Okay, so let's see how that came out. Ooh. Oh my goodness, wow. So I had the ink quite thick on there. And so let me just focus it. Yeah, so it's come out, you know, quite thick, that blue, but actually it's okay. So what I'm going to do next is set that aside. And what I want to do, I'm going to show you this shin collé technique, because I'm going to put some of the shin collé around the outside of the, you know, so this is like wallpaper or something behind this jug. So what I'm going to do is I might just pop it back on the purple to do a line of where the tablecloth might be. I'm going to use a thicker thing. I'm going to use some charcoal. So I get a different kind of line happening with the charcoal. So that will, just to separate the, that's very faint, a bit too faint actually. I'm just going to go over it again with a mechanical pencil. Okay, so we've got the differentiation of the, you know, that this is the tablecloth and this is the behind bit. I think I might do it on the tablecloth. I'm going to do some circles of shin collé. So my first thing I want to do is roll out the, oh, I'm using blue, never mind, now I'm mixing blue and purple, but that's okay. So I'm going to roll the ink back out, this purple, re-roll it. I've done it with the blue roller, so it's going to be a very bluish purple now. With purple, bring it back to being a bit more purple. So it's going to be a different colour, and then I'm going to pause the video while I go and get my tissue paper. I've got some white tissue paper, and you can do this by making cornflour glue, which is where you boil the cornflour until it goes gluey. But I haven't done that. I'm going to cheat and use PVA. So pausing the recording while I go and find my bits. So I have this tissue paper, it's white, it's a bit pearlescent, slightly pearlescent. And so I'm just going to cut a little section off the top using scissors. Ooh. Sound effects, door slams. Right, and then I'm just going to cut some circles. Looking at the size of the area I'm going to be working in, I want them to be I want them to be relatively small, these circles. Hi, machine. So relatively small. And because this tissue paper is folded up, I'm going to get several circles out of one go, sort of thing. Right, so here we have, whoops, the little circles. And what I'm going to do next, find out which way up I want them. I think I want them shiny side down, although they both sides shiny. No, one side's shinier than the other on these, so I'm going to just make sure I've got them shiny side down. And then I've got my little thing of glue, it's just PVA, like white glue. So taking the lid off, right, and little brush, pick up some, oops, you don't want too much glue. So the plan is to put the glue on the back of the circle and place the circle onto the ink. like this. Okay, and then continue to do that. You might want to turn your thing over and look at the area. So kind of visualizing where you want to place these spots in relation to the area that you want to fill. It can be a little bit tricky at this stage. If you wanted, you could take a tracing of the drawing and use that to kind of help you somehow. But anyway, I don't know how that would help. But so working out, that's probably going to be right. And then I've got over here some more, so that's kind of here. Whoops. And then a little bit further down, just a couple of them. So very important, glue facing upwards. Don't put it glue facing downwards, glue facing upwards on your, right, now let's see if this is going to work. So what you do then is you obviously place your picture over the area where the okay, and then you press, and if you were not doing it in an area that's already there, you would actually use a roller. If you were doing like a brand new, I'll show you that actually, I'll do another one. So I'm pressing now with my nails. I'm going to get some scratchy marks happening where it picks up the purple of the ink. Being careful to only press in those areas where you don't mind the ink coming up onto the print. And ta-da! So it picks up, it just makes a nice, it's just a nice effect. It's kind of a little bit textural, a little bit interesting. I might actually do some stripes going up to the, now I'm into it. Let's do some, I'm going to tear long stripes of my tissue paper. There we go, and then separate them, and then working out that stripy wallpaper. Now I think in red, so if I work out, I've got my red there, work out where it just needs to go straight down. I'm going to roll onto it to smooth it off a bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to paint. So I'm going to pause while I paint the glue onto these stripes of tissue paper. Okay, I've actually come across by accident a different way of doing it, where you glue the you actually glue the tissue paper onto the picture first. So a bit of a cheat, but it works quite well. So I'm going to continue in that way and then print it after. So just going to pause. So I've glued my bits of, I don't know if you can see them very well because they're white, but anyway, I've glued my bits of tissue paper down, and what I'm going to do then is just place this whole thing onto the red and then press and rub with just my fingers to then get the ink to do its thing. And I'm not doing my nails, so I'm not going to get the textured effect I got on the table coffee bit. And I think I need to move it up a bit so I get this bit. And okay, there's a cheat there where there isn't any stripe, but never mind. Right, so you get that? effect. Okay, so you can see the glue. I mean, the glue I've used has gone a bit splodgy. So, you know, you might want to be more careful if you don't want that to happen, but I quite like it. I don't mind it. So now the next thing I'm going to show you is how to apply some colour, watercolour paint to this monoprint. So I'm going to pause while I clean up and get rid of all this gubbins. Okay, so ideally one would wait for this to completely dry before adding watercolour onto it. But because it's oil-based ink, these kind of printing inks that I've used, it takes about, well, several days to dry. So because we haven't got time to wait for it to dry, I'm going to show you how to do it before it's dry. Just you need to be really careful not to kind of mingle in with the colour. It will, because it's oil-based, it will sort of resist a bit the watercolour, but it also will mingle a bit. So just be aware that it's easier to do when it's completely dry, because it won't mingle then. But anyway, and I'm going to talk about mixing some neutral colours. So when you have a colour wheel, which is the basic colour wheel, where you've got your primary colours, which are red, yellow and blue, and then you mix them together to get your secondary colours, which are orange, green and purple. And the colours opposite each other on the colour wheel are what's called complementary colours. Now, most of you already know this, but I'm going over it again. And the complementary colours are yellow and purple, green and red, and blue and orange. And they're called complementary colours because they complement each other, not by saying, oh, you look beautiful, darling, but by making each other look brighter when you put them next to each other. So for example, I've got yellow and I've got purple, and I'm going to use pink instead of red, but this is like my favourite opera rose, as you know. So red, it works the same as, you know, pink will work the same as red, and green and blue and orange. So if I hold them up a bit closer to the camera, hopefully you might be able to see how because they're next to each other, they look really bright. They look brighter next to each other. They sort of make each other zing and sing. Okay, so they look brighter when they're next to each other. Just gonna refocus. But when you mix them together, what happens? Let's find out. So I've got a wet brush here and I'm mixing the purple with the yellow, and it creates this quite disgusting neutral, kind of weird, kind of neutral sort of colour. I'm just going to paint it on the paper outside of the it's actually quite bright. It's not supposed to be that bright. I think I probably need to add more purple. Add a bit more purple. And also, of course, I've used a lemon yellow rather than a cadmium yellow. If you use different kinds of primary colours, will create different kinds of effects. So yeah, if you add more purple, then it goes more, a little bit more neutral. Yeah, that's more of a brown. Oh, it's quite a nice brown, beige. So that's what happens when you mix those two. Then when you mix green and red. Actually, this is a very dominant green, so I'm going to have to add some more red to it. I'm going to flip it and do it here because it's, I think it's phthalo green, and the phthalos are very dominant colours. So it's more like it. So actually a little bit more green. So there we have a nice neutral, quite a warm brown. Again, the type of red you use will affect this. If you were using cadmium red, you'd get a more less bright kind of neutral colour. So there you have a nice warm brown, neutral brown. Okay, and if you mix orange and blue, you get this kind of, because I've used, actually, it's very green because I've used a very turquoise, very greenish blue, so it's a bit of a cheat really. I'm going to add some ultramarine blue into there because to get a more kind of a less greenish neutral colour. Hold on one sec. So I've fished out my ultramarine. I'm just going to add a bit of that. It'll just take off that greenish colour a bit, make it a bit more grey, because it should be more of a grey. Blue and orange mixed together should be able to, should give you a quite nice grey colour. A little bit more blue, I think. Don't know what that orange was. I think it's a really strange kind of orange that I used. It's disappeared. I can't even tell you which one it was. Oh, there it is. Yeah, chrome orange. So if you were to use cadmium orange, say, and ultramarine blue, you'd get a much more of a grey. So this, you know, mixing your neutrals, you get really varied results depending on which type of complementary colours you choose to use in your mix. So it's always worth just have a little play around and experiment, see what happens with the ones you've got in your kit. So this comes out quite a nice bluish grey. And you can use this technique if you just add a little touch of the colour into, you know, it's complementary. You can just tone it down a little bit. You don't have to mix them as much as I have, but it just will tone it down and make it less bright. So I'm going to start adding these onto the monoprint and show you what happens when you add a little bit of paint. It just gives it, kind of lifts it, gives it a bit of colour. Obviously being careful, because if you're using, you know, you're using thin paper, so if you put too much water down, it's going to crinkle and wrinkle and cockle, called cockling when that happens. So just be aware not to put loads and loads of watery paint on there, because it might tend to wrinkle a bit, although the ink is quite heavy, so it sort of will offset that a little. So now I'm kind of struggling with the neutral colours. I'm really struggling. I'm going to have to put some bright. I'm sorry, but I can't. I can't be neutral. So what I'm going to do, I just want to put some opera rose. So you see how it sort of resists a bit, but it does mingle as well when the ink is still wet. You might actually like that effect, deliberately paint on when it's still wet, or you might wait for it to completely dry. But you see how it's got this weird combination of how it mingles yet is repelled by the ink. Quite interesting. And things like the amount of pressure, as usual, the amount of pressure you put on the brush, the amount of water, the amount of paint, they will all influence the kind of effect that's going to happen when you add the watercolor paint onto the page. So putting less pressure will mean it mingles less, putting more paint will mean it mingles less. More water, less paint means it mingles more. So you can kind of control that effect. Of how the colour looks on the page when you're adding this paint. Okay, and then I just want to put the lime, again, I'm going to go bright with the lime green. It's a bit like colouring in, really, just sort of I'm using the tip of my brush to get these kind of linear effects of the lime texture. And then the lemon obviously is going to be yellow. And after that, I mean, what you can do is play around with adding, well, I'll do that in a minute, thinking ahead of myself all the time. So I'm going to add some yellow to the lemon, being careful not to mingle it too much, or I can down here where it's a bit shadowy, but I want to get that brightness up the top, so putting on fairly thickly up there, leaving that area so it's sort of like a highlight. So I'm tempted to put a bit of yellow around the rim of the jug to offset the yellow that we've got down here. Maybe along the bottom here. So that just balances things out a little bit. And then the last thing I'm going to do is use one of these neutrals, or one or two of them. I've got this grey here. But I'm going to thin it quite a lot. And I'm just going to pop it in to get the shadows, kind of enhance the shadow in this jug. And then I'm going to pop in a little bit of the brown at the top, just to, I'm putting on quite very, very lightly, in fact, kind of almost just scraping the surface of the page with it. Okay, and kind of about it. If you wanted, you could do some more twiddly bits. Maybe for 5 minutes, I'll just do some little twiddly bits around the, you know, around the rim of the plate with the turquoise. Where did the brush go? Right, so going to do a little bit of twiddliness just to enhance that edge a little bit. And then I might, because these have got a little bit lost where I did those little flowery twiddly bits. So I'm just going to go over them with the watercolour just to bring them back up, because they are there, they're just a little bit hidden. I want them to be visible. Add a little one here. There's one there. That's just using the very tip of my brush, very lightly. It'll dry differently to how it looks. Always remember that with watercolour. Gouache is the same, dries a different colour, but watercolour generally dries quite differently. Okay, so I realised it's not in terribly good focus. Oops. If I lift it up, you'll be able to see it a bit clearer. Colour's not showing up so well, but oh, the green, you can't hardly see the green and the yellow. But anyway, that's my still life monoprint with chin collé and watercolour.